Hello and welcome back to the podcast called How This Indie Dev. Today I'm joined by my illustrious guest Andy Geers, who you say it Geers, is that right?
That's right, yeah. Although
Okay, yeah.
apparently, if you were Dutch, you would say it in a way that I can't even begin to pronounce. But yeah,
Okay.
I say gears.
Okay, nice. And it's you are an interesting game developer because you are working on a game that is based on the Bible.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so I have spent the last 20 years dreaming of making a game based on the Bible. And this past year, back in April, we finally launched The Serpent and the Seed, which is sort of the culmination of those 20 years of dreaming and about 4.5 years of sort of active development on this particular project.
That's crazy to me. So 20 years you've been trying to dream up this idea of how can I make a video game around the Bible, which is an interesting idea in itself. But then also you've been planning for 16 years and then like 4 years of execution and now it's out and released. How long ago did you launch it?
So it was like mid-April, so that where are we
Okay.
now? August, yeah. So a few months
Okay.
back.
Yeah, like 4 months ago or something.
Yeah.
Cool. Um, why? Why would you make a video game about the Bible? And why did it take
Yeah,
so
yeah.
long?
Why did it take so long is a great question. Um, yeah, I mean, so I grew up as a Christian in a Christian home, but it was only really as a student in my, say, sort of 18, 19 that I really got into the Bible as this, discovered it as something exciting that you would actually want to read. I think I grew up, perhaps you might call it sort of churchianity, almost like sort of thinking of Christianity as going to church, doing good things. But as a student, I was taught the Bible and like opening up actual Bible passages, discovering what it had to say, and I found it really exciting actually getting into the Bible. It's full of these amazing stories, really sort of interesting. It's not just a bunch of laws and genealogies. There's some really sort of exciting, interesting arguments and persuasive passages, and um, really kind of. I was at Cambridge University, so surrounded by all these intellectuals, and it was a real surprise to me that in that kind of environment, the churches were really thriving, the Christian Union was really, really strong, and people were taking the Bible seriously. So I got excited by that. It changed the way I thought about my faith. It changed the way I thought about life. Um, but meanwhile, I'd always grown up with computer games. Like, so even from the youngest age, we had like a BBC Micro computer, which I'm not sure if that's made it over to the States, but lots of pixel art and all that kind of stuff. And particularly then, as I got older, like story-driven games like Monkey Island, Day of the Tentacle, those kind of LucasArts classics.
Mm-hmm.
And I always just thought, well, I didn't always think, but from that moment on, just thought, wouldn't this be a great way of getting people into the Bible? So take these kind of story-driven games, keep that kind of sense of humour and that sort of light-hearted touch that those games were so good at, but then use that as a vehicle for helping people discover the Bible for themselves. So that was my idea. I wrote a blog post about it January 2005, and did my best to sort of make that reality. But I didn't have any skills or money or connections. I spent lots of time coding games and stuff, so I had those skills. But actually, there's a big difference between being a coder and being able to turn an idea into an actual meaningful, fun game. I
Yeah.
discovered those kind of story-driven games, point-and-click adventures, are a lot harder than they look.
Mm-hmm.
um, and especially if you're trying to do it, a lot of when I did a really deep dive into Monkey Island and like found anything I could on how it was made, the process of developing a game like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when you like really think about it, like so many of the puzzles in Monkey Island are about like stealing things or deceiving people, or it's all in this sort of light-hearted. You're a pirate, right? So of course those things make sense, but quite quickly realised that wasn't going to fly in a kind of game about the Bible. So, but I did want from the very beginning. I knew I wanted this to be a game that would appeal not just to Christians and people who were already into the Bible, but to a wider general audience.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to have to be fun. I couldn't compromise on that, but
Yeah.
equally, I didn't didn't quite sit right, that you would be quite the kind of swashbuckling shyster that you are in Monkey Island. So it's really hard to come up with fun puzzles that don't involve crime, basically. Is my discovery. So
That's
yeah, it was quite a long, drawn out process of like, yeah, what on earth do you actually do in a game about the Bible?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm just trying to think about the enormous challenge that it would be to try and take something like the Bible and put it into a compelling narrative point and click adventure game. I um, I didn't realize that your game had launched until like yesterday, and so I was looking into it, and I downloaded it on the App Store, and I played through Act One, and it was really interesting because you play as this bird character that is going through like the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, and then you kind of plant the themes of the game is called The Serpent and the Seed, so you're introduced to like the concept of like planting like physical seeds in this beautiful garden environment, and then there's like the deception of the serpent, and I haven't played past that, but I know that those themes continue on throughout the game with like the seed being symbolic of like the offspring of Adam and Eve. And so how did you, when you were thinking through how you wanted to architect the themes and like what you're trying to, because you said you're trying to introduce people to the Bible in a way that is approachable, how did you figure out like those two things specifically, the serpent and the seed? Why were they pivotal to the storyline?
Yeah, yeah. So I suppose that's where my game idea has developed over the years. So like the first several years, I was trying to focus on one specific Bible story. With the serpent and the seed, we're trying to teach the overarching narrative of the whole Bible and explore that, which is quite a kind of challenge in its own right. But um, I suppose quite early on, I settled on that in Genesis 3. So Adam and Eve have been in the garden. You've got this amazing place, which I always knew was going to be a great setting for a game because it's just so much fun and the sort of joy and wonder of the Garden of Eden. But then there's this moment where they have this one rule, basically. You know, there's sometimes we think, oh, we're never not allowed to eat the fruit, and God's trying to be miserable and mean. But actually, the Bible says there was loads of fruit trees they could eat from, and they were all delicious and wonderful to look at. But there was just this one tree they couldn't. And of course, naturally, what do? They go and eat from that tree, and they're sort of torn out of this garden paradise. But immediately after that, God gives them this promise that the seed of Eve will crush the serpent. So even right there in that moment where they're having to leave the garden, you've got this sort of hint that there's going to be a way back to the garden. That that's not the end of the story. So that's really what the game is about, trying to trace that one promise from Genesis 3 all the way through the rest of the Bible. And yeah, quite quickly, I suppose, I spotted that connection. You know, it talks about, some translations say offspring, but there's always a footnote that literally it's seed. You know, so you've got this tree and some fruit that they've eaten from, but the promise is of a seed. So I just thought, well, there's this wonderful connection. I got listening to a podcast series by an organisation called the Bible Project. I basically said on Twitter, like, has anyone ever come across anything thinking through the trees in the Bible? Because when you think about it, there's a lot of trees in the Bible. It starts in the Garden of Eden with this tree. There's two trees in the garden. There's the tree they shouldn't eat from, but there's also the tree of life. And the reason they're kicked out of the garden is so that they can no longer eat from the tree of life. And the implication is if they'd stayed in the garden, they could have kept eating from the tree of life and lived forever. So, but then the final chapter of the Bible has that same, the tree of life is there. They're allowed back into access to the tree of life. So it's there right at the start of the Bible, right at the end of the Bible. So I said, has anyone ever thought that through or explored that? And someone put me onto the Bible Project who'd done a whole podcast series on trees in the Bible. I just thought, this is awesome. And it was fascinating to listen to. And their kind of contention was that every major turning point in the Bible, there is a tree. I won't kind of go into that right now, but go listen. It's called the Tree of Life podcast series. from the Bible Project, and so yeah, I thought this is a really interesting, for a game designer, uh, you any kind of pattern is like a godsend when when it comes to making a game. So I thought let's dig into this, and yeah, just sort of finding that parallel between the literal seeds in the Garden of Eden and then these sort of metaphorical seeds of Eve later. And I just thought, well, this is a really nice sort of framing device for kind of exploring that, how the Bible story fits together.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I thought it was really clever how you play as like a little bird that's walking around, because then you kind of get to play the role of an observer of like the events that are going on. Because I was thinking it'd be kind of hard to try and keep agency within the player, but also try and tell an immutable story where like certain things need to happen without trying to remove player choice and all of that. I was One of the things that stood out to me as I was playing through just the first act is that moment where the serpent comes and deceives Adam and Eve, and Eve is like reaching for the fruit. And I thought it was a really, really cool like little design mini game where you have like these phrases popping up on the screen, and some of them are like phrases of temptation, like, oh, you can eat the fruit, you won't surely die, and it's like an enticement. But then there's like some of them that are like the negative of that. They're like, oh no, I should listen to what God told us. And as you click different ones, like your hand kind of like hesitates, and there's like that tension building moment. And so I thought that was a really cool thing as a designer. And I just yeah, I thought it was cool to see how you took something that is like an ancient piece of literature and you made it into something that is like gamified, but still trying to like be true to the source material as well. Because I imagine that would be a really hard challenge. And like the art of the game, the beauty, it's really well done, and it was cool playing through. I want to go back and see how the themes continue to develop throughout the game. Um, I had a question though. What was it? Um,
I
Something
want to talk about the
about
bird. You talked about the bird. I want to talk about the bird.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's talk about the bird. Is that the bird behind you?
This is half finished, but I'm making a little plushy version of. This is Mungo. I've gone out of focus, haven't I? But
Nice.
yeah, this is Mungo. Half of Mungo. I sewed. So we've just come back from exhibiting the game at a massive Christian festival, and I was like 35,000 people down on the south coast, and so I sewed a really big like life-size costume version, and then having done that, I was like, well, it should be easy to make a kind of normal sized plushie. So I've been trying to make one of those for every member of the team, but I haven't got too far yet because I keep giving them away at conferences and stuff. But
Oh, nice.
that's
How big
my
is your
latest.
team?
So there was about 10 of us in total. Like, so I was the only properly full-time permanent member. We had, but in the last couple of years, there was an artist who was near full-time, and a coder, like another part-time coder, and then a whole bunch of collaborators who would just dip in here and there to do like concept art or the music. I mean, the music is we'll talk about that later because that's a massive part of it. But
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so there's about 10 of us in total. So it was a really nice, like, lovely collaboration, and it was really fun. I've never kind of worked in such a collaborative project before, but you've got all these really specialized people who have incredible skills. Like, I really felt like world-class people, but on their one specific thing, and so they were blown away by each other's contributions. Like the musicians loved seeing all the artwork, and that really kind of inspired what they were doing. But then the music they were producing was a massive inspiration for the artists, and like, so yeah, it was really fun how everyone was like bouncing off each other, and it created a lot of sort of creative energy in that sense. So yeah, I loved that aspect of it.
Yeah, I found the same. Like video games seems to be like this amalgamation of a lot of different artistic disciplines and technical disciplines. And I've been in a similar environment on different projects where you just see somebody who is just killer at their one thing that they do, and then they bring it to the
Mm,
team and everyone was like so impressed, and then like everybody's just building towards this unified vision, and it's really fun to work on a team like that.
mm, definitely, definitely. The bird. So you were never meant to be a bird originally, um, but yeah, we very early on it was like a really important principle to me that like I knew you shouldn't be one of like the main characters from the Bible story. So like there's a bit of a I've heard it described as a sort of Moses is me syndrome, that like sometimes you read a Bible passage, you read about Moses parting the Red Sea, doing all these miracles and things, and naturally we sort of read ourselves into that role of like the hero of a story, or David
Mm.
versus Goliath. We think of it. What does it say about me when I face Goliaths? But actually, a lot of those characters are really very like specialized characters given real kind of promises by God. Like David's told he's going to be the future king when he faces Goliath, and actually it's less about what does this have to say for me. Like I'm actually more analogous to those sort of quivering Israelites on the sidelines who are too scared to face the giant, and like I need a hero like David, which so sort of one of my convictions, I suppose. Passages like that really are pointing us forward to Jesus as he's the sort of hero of the story. God is the hero of the story, and those passages are sort of what trying to. Well, think it's more constructive really to think what do they teach me about Jesus or about God. So I knew you weren't going to be Moses, David, Adam, whoever it was. So that idea that you'd be a kind of third party observer
Hmm.
um, came quite early on. But I'd always assumed you would be a human character.
Hmm.
Um, and the idea for the bird really came about by accident, almost like our concept artist when he applied for the role. He'd sent me his portfolio, and I just thought it was all wrong. Really, it was sort of full of these sort of sci-fi 3D characters, and I said, well, thanks very much for getting in touch, but I don't think this is at all the style that I had in mind. I sort of thought
Hmm.
by that point you know, well, I had an inkling of what I wanted it to look like, but
Hmm.
not terribly clear. But he said, well, what style are you after? So I sort of said, well, I'm after something perhaps a little bit more whimsical, like there's a children's author here in the UK called Oliver Jeffers. I said something like Oliver Jeffers. He's got this beautiful, like, painterly style, very kind of stylized characters thing. So overnight, he went away and threw together this piece. He sent to me the next morning saying, "What something like this," and it was just absolute like knockout, kind of perfect, just incredible. But he'd included his little fat little Robin that our game designer Dan just sort of instantly fell in love with this sort of piece of concept art. And I think that's what planted the seed in Dan's mind if you could be a robin. But we quickly realised that, it sounded absurd at first when he said, oh, you could be a bird. But it
Hmm.
actually solves a lot of problems. So, you know, when Eve is created, she's meant to be the very first human that Adam has ever laid eyes on. If he's already met you, it rather changes the dynamic of that story.
Yeah.
But secondly, like, yeah, here he is, this naked man, inviting you to sort of stay the night in his cave. And if you're like it was just, it was always going to be a sort of
Yeah.
tricky one. Whereas, yeah, somehow it just seemed a bit easier if you were a bird. And yeah, we all quickly fell in love with Mungo. So that's where the idea started.
That's awesome. I'm really interested in how you were describing, because there I'm trying to think about like the Bible is not very approachable for the modern person, I think. And I feel like a lot of what I have heard growing up and like stories in the Bible are like these kind of like standalone um, good versus evil, like or like lessons in morality. And when you're talking about like these meta narratives that start at the beginning of the Bible and the themes carry on as like one continuous story through the whole Bible, and then in the end, and like you said, like David and Goliath, that's one that like everybody is familiar with. You have this like little man that gets like a stone and flings it at a giant, and I hear people talk about that in like the modern cultural context as like what are the giants in your life,
Mm.
and that sort of a thing, and that sort of a reading makes sense to me, um, but I think it's very interesting how you are describing it as like these standalone stories are connected to like a vein that runs through the entire book where you said like ultimately Jesus is the hero. Is that something that is common amongst Christians, or where did you start thinking along those lines?
Mm. I don't know that it's as common as perhaps I think it should be. I mean, that is probably something that I was introduced to as a student, um, going to a church where I was being taught the Bible, in depth week by week. And I think what was distinctive perhaps about that was that they would, I mean, they call it expository teaching, where they wouldn't just sort of dive in, what should we teach about this Sunday? Or let's have a message on 1 Samuel 15 or whatever. Instead they would pick, right, this term we're going to teach through all of 1 Samuel. And so you'd start at the beginning and you would chapter by chapter. Okay, this week we looked at 1 Samuel chapter 1, so next week we'll look at 1 Samuel chapter 2. And really trying to understand, what does the book of 1 Samuel have to say? Because, we're not by any means the first Bible app out there, or Bible game, but if a lot of these games, so YouVersion, biggest kind of Bible app on the planet, they've got something called the Bible app for kids, which for my 4 or 5 year olds when they were younger was perfect, but it is exactly as you were describing. It's a whole bunch of Bible stories, and so you pick, right, let's read about Daniel in the lion's den or David and Goliath, and you just do that one little episode, and that's it. And I think there's a lot of value in that, particularly for those younger kids. But although the Bible is written by like lots of different authors, I think it's 66 books, a whole bunch of different authors over 1,000 years. But if you zoom in on one particular book, like, so 1 Samuel is written by one person, or probably a group of people ultimately, but it's written as a cohesive whole, right? And it starts with this amazing story of Hannah's. This is one of my favorite chapters in the Bible, Hannah's prayer, 1 Samuel chapter 2, and she's had this kind of personal experience of childlessness and sort of competition, and really brokenhearted, and God has done this amazing thing for her in giving her this child Samuel. And she sort of tells this epic kind of poetic song, which is sort of partly in response to her personal situation, but it quickly becomes so much sort of bigger and grander. And she talks about how God kind of raises up the poor from the ash heap and sits them with princes, and then when you have read that, then suddenly every episode in 1 Samuel, really you can sort of see how it relates to that song right from the beginning of the book. It isn't just random episodes. They're actually telling this big picture of how God works, and how he raises up the humble and how he brings down the proud. And so that narrative of David and Goliath, we could sort of think, well, how does Hannah's prayer at the start of the book sort of help us interpret that and understand that? And so I suppose it's about reading it in context rather than just making up our own interpretations. And what was the author? We used to talk a lot about the sort of author's purpose. why was this story written down? Like, what were they trying to show? What were they trying to explore and understand? And I suppose you also have to think of the Bible as, you know, it's a sort of, it's been delivered via this sort of community of people. Like if the very first book, you know, chapter 3 of the Bible starts with this promise of this seed of Eve will crush the serpent, it shouldn't come as any surprise that you know, that community is then sort of living with this expectation of, well, who's this seed going to be? So yeah, it seems natural to me that the other books of the Bible would be written somewhat with that expectation that this seed is going to come and defeat the serpent. And so it's no surprise if that theme emerges elsewhere in the Bible and is sort of developed. And it kind of gives a shape to the Bible as well. So, you know, straight after Adam and Eve, we quite quickly get into his genealogies and things. And, you know, I know people make a lot of fun of, there's a Monty Python, is it The Meaning of Life or something, where they, you know, they talk about how so-and-so begat so-and-so, who begat so-and-so. And you know, but actually it becomes, instead of being this boring, dreary thing of like, why do we care about this? When you see it through that lens of sort of expectation, it actually there's suddenly a real excitement about it. God's promised sort of a seed, it'll crush the serpent, and they keep having children, and so you're like, oh, is this going to be the one? Is this going to be the one? And then they keep dying, and so it's not that one. And then when you get these sort of exceptions to the pattern, so Noah comes along, and suddenly we get this whole expanded narrative. You're like, oh, is Noah going to be the one? And, you know, there's something different about Noah. He's like described as being, you know, more righteous and blameless. So he's got a relationship with God in a way that some of the others didn't. And you think, oh, maybe he's going to be the one, but he ends up getting drunk and ends up naked in a tent. And like, so even like the most righteous, blameless man to that point, he fails and is not the one. So yeah, you just sort of you keep getting these little moments of hope and expectation. Maybe David's going to be the one who's going to defeat the serpent. And it's really interesting how when you look at it through that lens, you know, so even Goliath is described in quite serpent-like language. So his sort of what do you call it, chainmail armor is described as scale. They describe it as scale armor, so almost like a snake. And then when David kills him, he puts his head. He talks quite specifically about how David puts his foot on his head and cuts off his head, which is exactly the language of Genesis 3. He'll crush the serpent, and it talks about this sort of heel. Yeah, I don't know. It's just there's all these little connections. You think, actually, I don't think that's a complete coincidence that even as David faces Goliath, it seems to be echoing back to that promise in Genesis 3.
Interesting. That's so fascinating. I'm curious, as you were talking, because you were talking about how Monkey Island was like a big inspiration for the game. But did you look at like other Bible games as sources of inspiration, or did you look at like, because normally I feel like when developers or studios embark on a project, they do like a bunch of market research to figure out like similar genres or styles of games. And did you do that kind of market research for Bible games, and what did you find was out there?
I mean, yeah, obviously, like when you've been dreaming of something for 20 years, you do pay a bit of a kind of keen interest in other efforts to do something similar. I think, I'll be honest, well, yeah, I'll be blunt perhaps, is more to the point, that I think there are a lot of pretty bad attempts at turning the Bible into a game. So I had a lot of examples of what I wanted to avoid. Not so many examples that I wanted to emulate. There was one game that came out a few years back that I got so excited when I saw it because it looked beautiful. It's really fun. So it was called again, it was a David and Goliath one. It was by a team called Righteous Tales. So it's David versus Goliath. Um, and it was almost, I got so excited about it because I thought, well, actually, if they've pulled it off, I can just throw my weight behind them, and I don't have to sort of go through this painful process of trying to make my own game. And it was brilliant, but they had sort of a slightly different, I suppose, understanding of the Bible and approach to the Bible of less of a sort of desire to see how it pointed to Jesus, and more just reading it entirely as a sort of Old Testament Jewish reader would have understood it, which that's fair enough if that's their sort of approach, but I would say it still doesn't quite do what I was hoping to do, and therefore I can't quite hang up my coat just yet. Hang up my hat. I don't know, what's the phrase? Who knows? But but there were. I mean, I went through a phase of playing a lot of games, thinking I just need inspiration. I played a whole bunch back at the start of this project. So some that I really enjoyed, a lot of kind of different ways of telling stories, I suppose. So Journey of a Broken Circle was one that I really enjoyed. Slightly a bit more of a platformer.
Yeah,
I
played that.
So you're a little almost like a Pac-Man shaped like a circle with just a missing slice, and you find various things that could fill the hole, and they each have different effects, like a pine cone that sort of a bit spiky and you can climb things. But what I really enjoyed about that was how the sort of narrative is built into the world itself. So as the words, as you sort of roll past, the words kind of stay with the landscape, and I found that really interesting, and we've sort of taken inspiration from that in a few places in the Serpent The Seed. I played is it Florence on the mobile phone? Again, almost not quite a game. It's like a. Have you played that, Thomas?
I haven't played it, no.
So that is a really interesting game where it's a sort of a romance thing almost, but you obviously, well, you follow sort of Florence, but she has these different she's at her day job doing spreadsheets, so you just have to do these very simple little interactions to fill out the spreadsheet. And but one thing they do then is those puzzles begin to reflect the sort of story itself. So she meets this guy, they start to have conversations, and you basically have to do these little jigsaws to respond to the conversation. But it starts off very awkward and these very difficult kind of jigsaws, and then as their relationship gets going, the jigsaw pieces get simpler and simpler, and the conversation begins to flow quicker and quicker, and whereas then, I don't want to spoil too much of a story, but basically as their relationship develops and changes, the gameplay really mirrors those different aspects of their relationship. So I found that really inspiring in terms of how can the gameplay itself help you explore the kind of emotions and the dynamics of what's going on. There was one game by a team who were Christians, less they wouldn't call it an explicitly Christian game, but their faith is really kind of central to the whole game experience, which is called That Dragon Cancer. A game came out, 10 or 11 years ago. Amy and Ryan Green made it with a team, but it was sort of an autobiographical sort of exploration of their experience where their young son Joel had cancer, and it's them sort of wrestling with their faith through that almost, but again, the gameplay really, it's not just okay. We've got this story we want to tell, and then let's just gamify it in really arbitrary, random ways. They've really thoughtfully, carefully, sort of tried to think how can what you actually do in the game help you kind of explore the emotions and understand it. It's like a really powerful scene where they're sort of in the diagnosis room waiting for the doctor, and Joel's there with them, and they have this sort of soundboard toy, almost like it's a farm. You pick a different animal and it will make these different noises, and as you do it, like Joel kind of giggles, and but over time it kind of gets more and more awkward, and his sort of his you can sort of see him almost declining in front of you, and then as the diagnosis comes, the room starts to sort of fill up with water, and there's sort of the drown, and it's a really kind of a really powerful moment, and it's very simple gameplay, but the gameplay itself is really kind of helping you feel what's going on and what it would have been like for them, and that was a very sort of important sort of inspiration for us, I suppose. So in the Serpent the Seed, for example, you haven't got to this bit, but there's a bit in Act 2 where you meet Abraham, and he's been given this promise by God of he'll have seed as many as the stars in heaven, and yet 20 years later he still doesn't have a single seed, a single offspring. So you kind of go through this waiting period with Abraham and Sarah, waiting, and then finally they have his son Isaac, and this sort of tree springs up as Isaac is born. But then almost immediately God sort of says to Abraham, like, I want you to go and sacrifice Isaac, like give him up. And there's this real like, what on earth are you doing, God? Like, it's really hard to understand. Like, Abraham sort of, he has to trust God, and then basically as a player you then have to cut down this tree, like blow by blow. You've waited so long for this son, and now here you are having to cut down the very tree that you've only just finally has finally appeared. And it's quite a simple interaction in one sense, but hopefully I think quite a powerful moment in the game. And so we really try to do that as much as possible, but the gameplay itself isn't just arbitrary, but it's trying to like actually get you into the emotions of it, and to experience something and understand better like what that sort of moment in the Bible is actually about.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I feel like most of the game developers that I talk to, they are trying to come up with systems and mechanics that are very fun and engaging for players. And you said that you are trying to make The Serpent and the Seed a fun game, but it is interesting that it's like fun isn't the only goal that you're going after, and you are trying to appeal to these deeper like emotional tides that run within people. I can't even think about how you would begin to do that, to try and like bring about these emotional moments in a game. I imagine music would probably play a huge part.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think quite early on I thought I would really like there to be some songs in this game, which isn't necessarily a kind of natural like conclusion you'd come to when designing a game, but obviously, like for Christians, singing is a huge part of how we express our faith, and I came across some really beautiful songs that I just at that moment when I was thinking through what the game would be. Not necessarily ones that you would sing as a congregation at church, but just, pardon me, songs that really express people grappling, well, I don't say grappling with their faith, but like expressing their faith, or one song in particular, I came across this group called Poor Bishop Hooper, and they're like a husband and wife. I think they're in Kansas City, and it was the genealogy of Jesus from Matthew's Gospel, which you sort of think, well, that's not at all promising source material for a song. Is again, so all these people who had children and what their names were, but it was just mesmerizing, like absolutely beautiful, and I instantly just loved it. And I just thought, I think these are the people I would love to make the music for this game. And I thought, I have no idea if they did commissions. Even if they did, they probably weren't interested in video games. But I thought, I'm just going to send them an email and see what happens. And I prayed about it, and almost within 24 hours, I had this email back from Jesse saying, we really want to talk. Because he said just last week, or like the last month, his wife Leah had said, wouldn't it be cool to make an album about trees in the Bible? And I'd obviously said, we've been thinking about this metaphor of sort of trees, and so I chatted to them. I was very starstruck, because I just their music was amazing. And I said, I'm thinking of having some songs. I thought we probably wanted to have 4 or 5 chapters in the game. I said, thinking of having one song per chapter, and maybe you'd be open to writing one of them. And he said, well, of course we want to write all 4, because that's what's interesting to us is that kind of big picture thing. And he said, would there be any other background music, other than these songs? I said, well, to be honest, yes, there would be other background music, but I'm sure I could find somebody else to do it. He's like, well, of course it'd be better if we just wrote all the music, because then it would be a lot more coherent and fit together. So I was like, all right. So they've written. I mean, it's incredible. The soundtrack is it's available to sort of pre-save on Spotify now and coming out shortly. But they've written, I think it's about 35 tracks, including there's 4 sort of big songs and then a bunch of little moments that are sung. And they are just honestly out of this world. Yeah. So their songs are absolutely incredible and really out of this world. In that, I think there's something genuinely otherworldly about them. They really well, my wife, she'd often sort of say how it sends shivers up her spine when she sort of first heard them. They're just absolute experts at taking these Bible passages and turning them into these beautiful songs, but that really kind of help you explore the emotions and the kind of so again, when Abraham and Isaac going up Mount Moriah, the really kind of emotional moment in the Bible, he's wrestling with his faith. God, what on earth are you doing? You've promised me all these things, but here you are asking me to do something that seems completely contrary to what you've promised. And we've taken made a song for that moment, and they I think they just they really serve that purpose of helping you. We're not just trying to teach facts about the Bible, what does it say. We really want people to engage with the emotions of it, to experience the joy and wonder of the Garden of Eden, and then that kind of heartache of being ripped out of it. And ultimately, I hope this isn't a spoiler, but we end back in the new creation, back at the Tree of Life, the last chapter of the Bible, Revelation 22. That's the final song, and it's just this amazing, joyful kind of a moment. So I think we've had a lot of really positive feedback from people who've said about how the game has helped them kind of engage with the Bible in a new way. And some lovely some reviews talk about how just it's I suppose it's not just a game, it's a real experience. One of the best reviews came from Pocket Gamer. So this completely secular website. The reviewer sort of said religion and games don't always mix beautifully, but every now and again there's an exception. And he sort of said the Serpent The Seed, he found it absolutely compelling and surprisingly fun, he said. And for me, that was the best kind of review I could get, because that was exactly what I was trying to do, build something that someone with no kind of particular affinity for Christianity could play and get something out of and enjoy and hopefully experience something. So I love that.
That's awesome. I'm curious because I know the game is out on iPhone and Android. Do you do you have plans for like making more additions to the game in the future, or putting it onto other platforms, or are you now in the spot where you're moving on to a new project? What's next?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually been pretty flat out continuing to develop it
Yeah.
since it launched back in April. So, you know, obviously, inevitably, you get your sort of bugs and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
We had quite a few tricky kind of memory management issues early on, where the game would work absolutely perfectly on some phones, and then on others it would just constantly crash. And
Yeah.
so, sort of, yeah, had to do a pretty deep dive on why that was happening, and then like endless kind of usability kind of testing and refinement. So I wanted to build something. Well, I wanted as many players as possible to reach the end, basically, and it's
Mm-hmm.
quite an interesting challenge of getting that right, so that you know it doesn't just always tell you exactly what to do. There is that element of discovery and figuring stuff out, but equally, as far as possible, you kind of know what you ought to be doing, and so we've done a lot of testing. I had to do some sort of analytics of how far through the game people get, and spotting where are those moments where a higher than expected percentage kind of, you know, we found, it was just one or two little moments where like a really surprising number of people dropped out, and so had to sort of figure out what's going on there. Why is that? So yeah, I've been trying to like tweak, just add in little nudges here and there or things to try and get more players through. Yeah, I mean, there's loads of. I mean, obviously, there's always more you want to add to these games. You know, I think we had to just put a deadline in the sand, and there's a lot of stuff that just got cut. Stuff that I've always thought would be an essential part of a game that just, you know, no,
Mm-hmm.
that's gone because we were just like, we've got to get this game shipped now. Um, so some of those I might go back and add back in. There's a few extra animals that Adam might get to name. I mean, there's some bigger projects like I'd love to get it translated into more languages, and
Oh, yeah.
that's a challenge in its own right, because the Bible passages are so kind of integrated into the game. Like there's this beautiful like lettering and artwork for various
Oh, yeah.
promises
You would need
and
like a whole
stuff.
new graphic for that.
Yeah, or figuring out a new approach for
Yeah.
how we would do those in a localized version. Um, yeah, we are thinking about other platforms, so you can wishlist it on Steam now, and um, again, like, there are different expectations on desktop. So, well, for starters, the game is very designed for mobile at the moment, so there's lots of like orientation changes and
Yeah.
these little moments where you sort of just hopefully, moments where you have to think about the world a bit differently, and so we have to just treat all of those rather differently on desktop. But also then things like, well, if you're on desktop, is there an expectation of having like voiceovers and things, which is also an accessibility thing of like a lot of,
Mm-hmm.
there is a bit of reading involved at the moment, which, you know, I don't mind. I think reading the Bible involves a fair bit of reading, but at the same time, it does like end up excluding some users who just can't,
Mm-hmm.
you know, reading is a problem for them, and you know that doesn't sit so comfortably with me. So they're just thinking through, well, what would we do, and then also things like then like, well, what about like controller support, and like that is particularly because we've got so many little sort of mini games, and like almost every little bit of the game would need rethinking for, is this even possible playing with a controller? So yeah, I can anticipate we're going to be pretty busy on this game for a long while yet. And I have had beginning to think of a few little ideas about other potential projects, but nothing too concrete yet.
Mm-hmm. Do you have um, like a monetization model for the app? Because it was a free download, and I don't know if I didn't get far enough to where you can like pay for additional content, or like is there a, or like ads, like is there a way that this game is making money, or is that not the priority?
Yeah, I mean we're in a pretty unique position in that we are a charity. So
Mm-hmm.
like helping people explore the Bible is kind of our reason for existence as a charity. We want to help people get to know Jesus better through tech. So yeah, I mean, more than wanting people's money, we want people to play the game and ultimately get into the Bible, really. So the development of the game was funded mainly through grants from other charities and a bit of crowdfunding. I think we raised, we did it in 2 rounds, but yeah, probably 60, 70k through crowdfunding. Yeah, when you complete the game, it does sort of encourage you to, like, we'd love you to sort of donate what you think it's worth. Because, I mean, those funds would, things like these future developments, also marketing the game is, you almost need to spend as much on the marketing side of things as you do on the development. And, that's where we would really benefit from having a bit more funding, I think. So yeah, and obviously that's a real privilege for us in some ways, that we're not having to think, we're not sort of constantly thinking through the lens of how can we make sure this is profitable. Like it does free us up to just think, how can we make this a beautiful game that people want to play? But yeah, at the same time, we still have bills to pay, have team members to sort of to fund and things. So perhaps that there's, every member of the team are themselves Christians, and I'm sure have given below market rate to us because they're excited about the project. But in many ways our costs are just the same as any other game project. But we're just not charging for it at the moment. So.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. I think I had one more question that was on the top of my head, but it escapes me right now. Is there anything that you wanted to go over in particular?
I was just thinking that through. I mean, I suppose I could talk a little bit about some. There are a few sort of interesting sort of technical challenges we've had to overcome. If you wanted to ask a question about that.
Yeah, I think that would be really interesting as well. You talked about how, like, you have things that make localization an issue, and you have like different platforms. It's like with the screen orientation. Are there other sort of difficult technical challenges that presented themselves while you were developing the game?
Yeah, I think one of the things that took the biggest sort of investment of time and the most hard take in some ways was around the lighting of the game. So we really wanted to make something that looked as beautiful as we could, while at the same time being a pretty small team on a small budget. Greg Clifton did an amazing job with the artwork. He's sort of an artist here in the UK, but he's always sort of wanted to use his art to help people discover Jesus. So it was a kind of dream project for him, and he was a real joy to work with. But we always knew we wanted to take on a team member who could help us sort of do the kind of extra kind of lighting stuff in Unity. So it was quite fun how we actually, that Dragon Cancer I mentioned earlier is like an inspiration for the project. We got to work with a couple of the team members from that. So Amy Green ended up sort of writing the script for the game, and she took my little. I'd basically written all the words, but she was able to go through it line by line and basically say, how could we tell this sort of same dialogue but in a more interesting way? And her flourishes were added a lot to the experience. But we also have a guy called Josh Larson who he kind of built the kind of basic lighting engine for the game, and Unity has all this sort of built-in 2D lighting where you can add your light sources and all that, but he kind of flipped it on its head and created this kind of almost sort of shadow-based lighting where not just you sort of creating the light sources, but he could sort of define these areas that would be in shadow, and all of the leaves are kind of swaying in the wind and stuff, and he would allow us to create sort of matching shadows that swayed in the wind as well. So that was one of those things that, early on you got the basics working fairly quickly, I think, but just getting that over the hill where we could actually roll that out everywhere was quite a process. But I think the results were absolutely beautiful, and it adds so much. It was really like a transformation when you just take the basic artwork but add the sort of lighting on top of it. So that added a lot. And there's one particular scene in the Garden of Eden where there's all these sort of different, like there's a chameleon and a frog, and just this incredible lighting, and it just really helps build that experience.
It's one of those games where I like I said, I only played a portion of it, but you can tell that you really designed the scenes to be like these beautiful picturesque moments where you have like these little vignettes with a view of like mountains and stuff in the distance, and everything just seems like what do they call it, the composition of like everything, where they're placing the camera kind of pans, and then it's like it's very well done, and it reminds me of games like what's that game, Grease? Have you played that?
Oh yeah.
That's
definitely. That was another
vibes.
one of those games that I played during the kind of early stages, and yeah. I mean, another technical challenge was it sounds kind of pretty basic when you think about it, but like was just actually having a snake. I kept wanting to animate the snake, and I kept thinking, oh, this ought to be easier than it is, but just like that thing of the tail kind of following the head. But I kept running into these sort of, sometimes you kind of want, like, which way round do you rig it? Like, do you rig it so that the tail follows the head, or so that the head follows the tail? And I kept, whichever way I did it, I was like, I think I've done this backwards. And so just trying to code it so that in the end, you could basically animate the head, and then the rest of his body would kind of follow. And that was probably a sort of YouTube Unity tutorial in there somewhere.
Totally.
Also, like things like there's little hummingbirds that kind of darts around that you can help Adam name, and coding that so that it sort of flew around gracefully was kind of an interesting challenge in a sort of similar vein. So there's enough sort of little coding puzzles in there to satisfy my programmer brain.
There's quite a lot of little mini games, I just from what I've experienced, you have like the one where you can go and name the animals and pick different attributes that align with the animals that you come across, and like catching leaves when you're like ascending up the tree of life, or feathers, and what was the other one that I was thinking of? Oh, the with the firefly and like the creation of Eve, where like the lights go out, you just see the skeleton of Adam, and you like take the ribs out of Adam. It's very, very thought provoking and unique the way that you've designed those mini games.
Yeah, and again, you mentioned earlier about the sort of moment where you're picking the fruit, not picking the fruit, that moment of temptation, and I'd quite early on settled on this idea that I wanted that there's a parallel there between Adam naming the animals and the sort of eating the fruit. He's basically looking at these different animals and thinking, right, well, what are they like? What do they do? What do they look like? And you see, you can come up with some fun combinations to like, there's a mandrill with you can sort of, you want to focus on the color of its bottom, or like, or what it does, that it climbs trees or eats fruit, or and similarly when they're looking at the fruit, that it talks about in the Bible about how Eve saw that it was a delight to the eyes and good for food. So there's a bit of a like, well, what does it look like superficially? But then there's also the kind of, what does it do? Well, God said, when you eat of it, you'll surely die. And but the serpent has, I've read it, he says it will make you wise, or it will make you like God. And so I could see the parallel there between Adam naming the animals and them sort of being so hopefully there's a bit of an echo in the gameplay in those moments. And
Totally. That's very neat. Cool. Um, Man, we hit an hour. I think that's all of the questions that I had. Is there anything else that you wanted to go over?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you for spending some time here. I'll leave some links in the description so that people can go download it or wishlist it on Steam. It's an awesome game. I'm gonna go check out the other acts. How many acts are there?
There's four acts, but
Four acts. Okay.
Act 2 is probably the biggest, but then Acts 3 and 4 are pretty short, really. So.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Well, I'm excited to check that out. And is there anything else that you want to link so that people can follow what you're doing?
I mean, we're on the got all our social media things,
Yeah.
and yeah, check us out. And yeah, I mean, I can give you the link to. You can now pre-save the soundtrack on Spotify if you know the
Oh,
link.
nice. Awesome. Cool. I'll leave all those links down below. Awkward outro. Thanks, Andy.
No, well, thank you so much for having me. It's yeah, it's been really fun.